Hey guys, and welcome to another video. Sadly, this one's a day late. Yesterday, there was the Points of Interest livestream, or was it ready up? But they discussed the Tempest. We got to see it in action, the full Elite Specialization. One of these massive streams that's very revealing about the way that that Elite Spec is going to work. And I wanted to give you guys a sum up, give you my thoughts on exactly how the Tempest will play. I'm kind of lukewarm to the Elite Spec. I see it's got its virtues. I see it's got some pretty cool effects on it. But looking at it all, I'm just not that inspired by, like, a crazy amount of new or exciting builds or playstyles that are going to be available to the Elementalist. And I say this in full consideration of what I said earlier in the week as well, that Elementalist was already really strong in a lot of places, and we knew that the Tempest was going to have this kind of AoE-based, frontliney support CC angle, and of all those words I just threw at you, they're already kind of parts of Elementalist gameplays and things that they're not too shabby at in the first place. So, let's talk about the Tempest, let's see what we're actually going to get out of it, and see what you guys think too. So, first thing to mention is some of you guys will have noticed, actually, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't notice it until, like, Thursday when there was no blog post. With the other Elite Specializations, we had a trailer for that Elite Specialization. There wasn't one for the Tempest, and I wonder if we're just not going to get them anymore. It's one of those little telling things, actually, you know. We had a Points of Interest where Ruby said, oh, we got something really exciting for you next week, and then nothing happened. We've had little things over the months that seems like Arena have had their plans, and they've kind of been set back, and they've been really constricted in what they can show and what they can talk about and how much development's really been done on the expansion. And this is kind of another thing, you know, when they first started dealing with the Elite Specializations, they were like, yeah, we can have this cool little trailer, and now it seems that they're so crunched for time that they can't really do those. So this was addressed at the start of the stream. They said, yeah, unfortunately, we'd rather be working on other stuff. I think probably it's just that whatever team or guys, if it even is a full team, makes the trailers and deals with that stuff could have their hands swamped with something else. I do think we'll get another Heart of Thorns trailer before the game releases, at least like an actual release trailer at the very least. And considering over on Josh Foreman's channel, there was an outtake that went out recently where Peter Freeze comes over and, like, bothers him while he's trying to do a little section. I wonder if we're going to see, like, another trailer and those guys are busy on that instead. But ArenaNet had to decide, you know, we can't just delay an Elite Specialization for the sake of this one trailer when everybody so desperately wants them, so that's what happened. Anyway, so that was one thing. The stream then did go on to talk about every weapon skill, every utility skill, and every trait. We had Carl McLean with us, the guy who wrote the blog post, and knew Elementalist reasonably well. We got to see, I mentioned in my video that I really liked the Reaper because it had a lot of cool interactions between its traits and its skills and stuff that was interacting and crossing over with other lines. And for the footage here, you will see a variety of different stat sets, so you kind of get that range on the tooltips, and you get to see how these things actually work. And then on top of that, you know, if he's showing off an interrupt on one of the weapon skills, we were actually seeing lightning strikes come down because he'd taken the time to toggle on lightning rod, and, you know, it demonstrated an understanding of the class and just little cool combos you can do. He'd drop a water field, and then he'd actually swap to earth and dodge roll in it for evasive arcana blasting, and that kind of stuff. That was really nice to see. So just generally higher and higher quality we're seeing. We saw the addition of the tooltips in the top right hand corner, and it just goes on. So very nice. Also, some other base things about the Tempest. They said that they've been working on it for a really long time, that had gone through multiple iterations. Specifically, this idea of the sword was basically being talked about, and yeah, it does seem like they absolutely were working on sword for a while, but it wasn't confirmed. We all know it wasn't confirmed. It was a data mined thing, and sometimes those data mined bits of information will snap away from us, and it will turn out because the game's in development, they've changed their ideas. So Tempest is now Warhorn. It wasn't always, but this is kind of the best iteration that they eventually came up with. You guys will have noticed as well that when just general specializations came in the game, a lot of the Elementalist access to auras was stripped away. And where did those go? Well, they went to the Tempest. And the thing that excites me most about the Tempest, actually, is the Auramancer capabilities of the class with some of the new traits they've got. There's, like, heal on aura application and a bunch of other cool stuff. So that's kind of how that's been balanced in now. And I guess Tempest will be the, you know, one of the core Auramancer ideas. Alright, let's look at overloads. So, you would have been seeing some of this in the footage already. Last video I did, it wasn't even clear whether you could really move in the overloads. You absolutely can. Every overload, you're moving around during it. It's just they have very, very close range. These are basically melee abilities, and so there is high positional play with these overloads, but you can move around with them just fine. Also, it wasn't clear before whether overloading would kick you out of the achievement or not. And if it did kick you out of the achievement, this raised some weird questions like, which achievement do you get kicked to? Do you get kicked to the one always on the right? Do you get kicked to the one always on the left? What if you overload every single achievement and you've got no cooldowns? Where do you get kicked to then? Well, actually, it doesn't kick you out of the achievement at all. So this kind of play that I was excited about, where you would have say fire Ellies who camp in staff and PvE, and then they would overload after a while, but it would kick them out, so they'd have to do it at the end. A little bit like how Mesmers will be, you know, mind-racking at the end of the fight, or Warriors used to, say, pop their burst skill right towards the end of the fight. I was kind of interested in that, but it doesn't really matter. So now you'll just be able to camp fire achievement, pop your overload, then wait for it to come back, and then just keep camping the entire time. Alright, and so let's look at Overloading Fire. This is your Tornado ability. It looks like it persists a little while after you activate it. I'm not too excited about this. I'm mostly excited again for Condi builds with this, because it's putting out a little bit more burn that we have access to. I'm trying very hard to just think of the numbers as placeholders, and that these can be tweaked to be more powerful or less powerful based on how strong they are. And, you know, I think flavor-wise, the skill is pretty cool. It's not the same as dropping a giant tornado as I was hoping for, I guess, probably a little bit unrealistically, say like an elite tornado, but it's a nice overload. Moving on to water really quickly. This one, actually, you become a bubble. I was imagining it would throw the bubble out in front of you. You know, you kind of meditate and you float in the sky a little bit as a bubble hovering around. Really weird style of effect there. It doesn't really have a big pop effect either, but it's pretty nonetheless. And what's cool about it is there's a special kind of AoE ring, you know, really obvious tell, hey, so that your allies can know, walk into this so you can get that regen, so that you can get that Condi cleanse, and you can actually get the support from it. So it's kind of funny to see, but there you go, that's your water overload. Looking at air, this was actually my favourite of the overload effects. Sadly, I was really expecting a lot out of the earth one. This thing does look like that old Nimbus cloud I was talking about. Come on, guys. Look, really? You know, this footage I showed you guys last time? This is kind of just a spruced up, awesome looking version of that. It's going to strike these lightning bolts down, but what's really cool about this is they seem to hone in on targets who are within range of the effect. So it's not like Lightning Hammer 4 or Glyph of Storms where they'll just randomly throw all over the place. These actually seem to be directly striking people who are within the effect's radius. And it's so much vulnerability. I mean, yeah, I'm an Ellie, I like to see powerful stuff, but please, Arena there. Well, they have to change vuln, surely. Why is it every elite specialization since the Dragon Hunter, okay? I've come out with, oh my god, there's tons of vulnerability. Like, what, were they just expecting all classes and just one ability to be able to get over half of the cap of the stacks for vulnerability? I really think that vulnerability, I'm sorry, they should half the, now that skills are in this position, they should half the potency of it and double the stack amount that it maxes at to 50. Or if you really want to go crazy, half the potency and then double it to 100. So it is, in the end, if you reach max stacks, twice as potent, but to get to 100 stacks of vulnerability might be difficult. I don't know, these are just placeholder numbers, but I feel like there is way too much vulnerability going around. Maybe you guys can have some comments on that. And then lastly, we've got Overload Earth. This doesn't do the Revenant camera thing I was hoping, where we just go flying off like really far. We can move around in it. It has a break bar baseline. This was perhaps a little mistake I'd made before. I thought it was a trait to actually get the break bar, but no, this is just baseline. So when you overload it, you get that break bar for yourself. They explained that if you're Moamorphed during the break bar, it consumes the whole break bar, but it doesn't actually turn you into a Moa, so you can still cast. So it's still, you know, that is that kind of strength that we're talking about at the moment. And consider the new Engineer F5, I think the Moas using that are going to be the more important thing, and those actual Mesmers using just a Moa as their elite would kind of have to wait. But this thing, yeah, you are basically Toph, which a lot of people wanted. I do very much like the idea of playing one of these very, you know, I did that Medic Elementalist build a while ago, and one thing you'll notice is if you get hit by a really big Zerg that are really tightly packed and doing very well, especially if they've got Venom people with them, you kind of just explode with conditions, and you cannot move whatsoever. But then I love the idea of playing an insanely tanky Ellie that then overloads Earth as soon as this happens, cleanses it all, shrugs all of the other movement impeding conditions, just running around really fast, and you're actually, as well as the skill effect, you're elevated above everyone else, kind of moving around. That's a cool thought, and especially think about big characters too. Don't think about an Asura riding around on this thing. Think about how it's going to scale up when you're like a giant Char or non. They even said that there's different animations for the people riding these based on the race that you are. Kind of think like the Broomstick and how the Norn had their own special animation, and then the Char would ride them like surfboards and stuff. So that's fun, and you know, I'm really not going to spend much time complaining about the skill effects. Mechanically, this is a blast finisher. It gives cripple, and then when it blasts back down, it's another immob. But not too exciting in that regard. Alright, so those are your overloads. It's very interesting to see the Tempest playing with, like, just this weird skill bar where the overload's there. One final thing I should have mentioned before we did the individual ones. It doesn't matter if you're in combat. So, if you start combat in fire, you just have that overload already. I think this could be a little bit of a mistake, make a bit less play to it. I think it would be more interesting if it only started charging the overload once you went into combat, but maybe that's just me, quality of life. It might just be frustrating to play it another way. But so, yeah, now we're going to see Elementalists with, like, very peculiar and different skill effects on their current attunement than we're currently used to. So that was kind of a weird thing for me to see, considering I've spent so many hours on this class. Now, one base thing about the Warhorn. In the stream, we're hearing the generic Warhorn noise. But as we know, the Tempest gets 8 of these, okay? That's so many more than the other classes get that just get 2. And so I think they're very concerned about that same sound effect being played over and over. So they're doing some audio work, and it specifically sounds like the Tempest Warhorn skills, compared to all the other Warhorn skills in the game, they get, like, a different sound effect. They'll have it toned, and maybe even on a per skill basis, they'll have different sound effects. The audio teams actually supposedly work on that, but again, they didn't want to wait for that to actually show us the specialization in general. You can really feel the close rangeness of this Warhorn. Comparing this offhand, and we'll get into the skills in a second, my general impressions of the offhand, though, are that for PvE, we'll probably just swap it on before fights, because there's no build lock in the game, which I think is a crime. We'll probably just have it on before fights, we'll blast a bit of might and share boons out, and then we'll just get rid of it, and we won't actually be using it. For PvP specifically, I feel like it is lacking the mobility that Dagger offers you, and mobility is not just good for chasing people down, which the Warhorn, I feel like, lacks, but it's also very good for survivability and getting away. It lacks that, and then it also doesn't have kind of the hard mitigation that Focus has too on the defensive side of things, so I feel like it's in a weird spot. It's obviously a weapon that is supposed to be sacrificing those capabilities for group-wide supports, but I just question, I know that team fights happen in PvP, I know that they do, but I question, especially with the new game mode, where there are less team fights and we're more frequently going to be buffing NPCs, the effectiveness of that is wobbly at best. I question how often we're actually going to see Warhorns being used in PvP. Likewise for World vs. World, though I think we may see Tempests in all 3 game types. Specifically the Warhorn in World vs. World, for, like, the small group roaming stuff, again, you've got the strengths of Dagger and Focus. Warhorn may see a place here. But then for the big Zerg stuff, you might think, oh yeah, Warhorn's amazing. Look, it's about buffing allies, and you've got a huge Zerg of people to buff. True, but at the same time, look at its competition. It's against Staff. And Staff is fantastic in large Zerg gameplay. It's got the big water, it's got the small water, has multiple effects that will bypass in their own little ways the 5 target cap. Staff's incredible, and so the competition is fierce. And yeah, Warhorn in general, though it's kind of cool, I'm not too inspired to run it in any really meaningful way in any of the 3 game types with the way I play the game. And this could contribute to my lukewarmness of the spec. Alright, let's look at the skills themselves though. Here we go. For fire, we have Heat Sink. This is an ability we hadn't heard about before. This is one of the more exciting ones. This will give 3 might to you and everyone around you. And then it basically casts Signet of Inspiration. So it will share all the boons that are currently on you to all of your allies. Mesmers get this on Signet of Inspiration. They also have a trait that will randomly pop Signet of Inspiration for them. I think is when they summon a Phantasm. And, you know, this is one of those really kind of boon support-y style things. And, yeah, because Tempest is supposed to be support-y, it makes sense that they got this. But, again, I feel like they're walking on Mesmer's shoes. You know, they got a new Elite Rebound, and it just feels like it takes away from Mesmer's alacrity, doesn't it? I don't even really play that much Mesmer, and I can feel the sting there. But yeah, so this is Heat Sink. It's an exciting skill. Don't get me wrong, the Mesmer stuff aside, my god, I really like the thought of this. I love the thought of being able to pump a bunch of boons out on myself. You know, Spec Arcane as well. We already know that Ellies get a ton of boons. They just share those out to everyone. That's cool. It's a shame that Runes of Lyssa have changed to not just pulse everything onto you. I still love the idea of synergies where a Ranger gives you, like, Plasma. You eat the Plasma and then you pop out a Heat Sink and everyone gets, like, most of the boons in the game. But by the way, I'd love to see those updated to have quickness and resistance added to them. But yeah, that seems pretty nice. Oh, another topic, well, since we mentioned it, on resistance, the Tempest gets a ton of cleanse, and kind of cleansing collies, removing them is a big part of it, but to get to no resistance, so that's a little bit of distinction there, perhaps, compared to the other classes. So then the skill 5 in fire is Wildfire. We heard about this before. Look at this effect, guys. My god, look at that effect! It's, come on, that is just a badass version of Flame Wall. Alright, maybe I'm being a little bit unfair. It is mechanically slightly different. So, this thing has slightly ever so slightly shorter burn durations on it, but really high base damage. You can kind of tell they've just taken the technology for the building a road revenant ability, the Jarlis ability, and they've just kind of made it set on fire, made it a lot wider. And here's an interesting thought, actually, in a synergy that they didn't ever mention on the stream. It's not confirmed, but if you take persisting flames, this fire field won't just last longer, but it will actually go further as well, which is kind of cool. The higher base damage on the ticks of that are definitely the distinguishing thing. It has a high cooldown to boot to compensate for that. Now, that can be augmented fairly heavily with rebound, for example, and considering the Elementalist gets 33% cooldown reduction on its trait lines instead of just 20% like the other classes, so you can drop that a fair amount, but that's pretty hefty. Alright, moving on to Water Achievement, we've got Tidal Surge. This was the ability that was referenced before, we didn't know what it did. It's got a big heal on it. It will apply regeneration. The only reason it's really applying regeneration is so that it has synergy with one of the Water Grandmaster traits that cleanses condies on regeneration, and then it moves out and it knocks back foes. So this is where some of the CC capabilities of the Warhorn come into play. Again, think of PvP style, you can probably throw this down on a node, heal up whoever's trying to contend that node for your team, and then maybe knock other people back, but there's so much stability and stuff around, I doubt it's really going to be super effective. That's Tidal Surge, and the other one's Water Globe. This one, again, we heard about. Water Globe, remember, the Overload turns you into a bubble that you hover around in. Water Globe is going to summon a moving water field. I couldn't quite tell if this was ground target and you choose where it goes, or it just kind of floats out in front of you. This will pulse heals to people if you stay walking around in it. Doesn't apply regeneration, so this one won't be cleansing conditions like Tidal Surge does, but because it's a moving water field, there's like little different plays to this than there are on our static water fields you can see on the staff. So this one, for example, you can run along with when you're out there in your Zerg World versus World, and when people call for water, they might start calling for moving waters as well, which is interesting. And again, like Evasive Arcana, in Earth Attunement, you swap to Earth and you kind of dodge roll on the move in the direction that the water field's going, and you can kind of stay with it, and that's a nice little bonus, and easily seen, hopefully, by players who aren't even on the Tempest and they know how to support themselves with it. Alright, moving on to Air. We get Cyclone. Probably my favourite Warhorn effect. It sucks everyone into a line in the middle, but what's curious about it is it almost looks like a zipper. You know, look at that ability. It looks like a zipper. This does damage too, and again, if you trade it with like Lightning Rod, it sucks people in, and then it's going to strike them with Lightning Bolts too, applying weakness to them. It's an unblock. Many of these Warhorn skills, in fact, all of them I think, are unblockable. So again, this is a nice little perk that actually makes this CC have some strength to it. Again, on the PvP side of things, a Guardian uses Shelter, and you can cast this, and you might be able to knock them out of it and interrupt them. I keep having to use PvP as our go-to for many of these skills and the effects of the skills, because PvE really doesn't have enough block or many of these mechanics to make it actually worth talking about. In fact, when it comes to skills like Cyclone and a few of these Warhorn abilities that move out in front of us, I'm kind of concerned, because I feel like they're just, if we're stacking, like an LOSing, if we're against a wall or something, and there is less of that now, I will say, there is less of that since Fiery Greatsword isn't, like, used for the Fiery Rush anymore. If we are against a wall in one of these situations, I feel like the Cyclone may not have too much of an effect. Like, what if it just comes out, hits the wall, and dissipates instantly, and then, like, maybe you don't even get that first, like, maybe people don't get sucked in at all. This could be a weird way with the new skills that they're kind of trying to add some more downsides to stacking against walls specifically, but we'll see. This also gives swiftness to allies, so again, a little bit like the Water Globe, the moving water field. You can throw this out in front of you and run along with the zipper and give everybody swiftness. So, yeah, a cool effect at the very least. Next we have Lightning Orb. This one was really fun. Before we were discussing, oh, this was super high single target damage in GW1. Why is it on the Warhorn on the Tempest that isn't claiming to be any of those things? And so you can kind of see its AoE component here. Again, it's got that weird thing. If it hits a wall, does it just disappear? I'd really like it if it bounced away from the wall and then kept moving. But this effect, if you've ever done Arar Path 1 and you've killed that Jotun at the end who throws out like the really slow moving orbs, if you've ever done COE Story or recently so you can actually remember what the enemies do, there are Inquests that throw out these balls of lightning that move slowly and do tons of damage. In Fractals, the one with all the cat golems, the boss at the end, again, does something like this. It's basically that. It's a really slow-moving lightning orb, and as it moves, it's throwing these little projectiles off of it. So that's your AoE. Best seen, obviously, in the footage here. How good it is for damage, I don't know. Like, it seems really easy to dodge. The tuning on it seems really low at the moment. You're at the mercy of the projectiles actually coming out. How often do they... I mean, the effect is cool, but I just question its viability, like, a lot. It seems really weird. Moving on to Earth, the final attunement. We have Sand Squall. Now, this is the ability we heard about in the blog post that will do interesting stuff with boons. So what it does, first of all, is it applies protection to yourself. And then what it does is it increases the duration of all the boons that are currently on your allies by a flat 2 seconds. So it's not like a percentage based, oh, if you have 30 seconds of might, you get 20% more might, and then you get a reasonable number. It's a flat 2 seconds. So some boons... this is negligible. Some boons like regeneration, 2 extra seconds of regeneration, whoop-de-doo. Regeneration is the most boring boon out there. However, for some other boons, this could be really good. For example, stability. And what's quite nice, again, they didn't talk about this on the stream, but there is a very much underused Earth trait at the moment, which gives you stability when you swap to Earth. So you'll swap to Earth to get access to the Sand Squall, put stability on yourself and all your allies, immediately Sand Squall, and that 3-second trait, or is it 2 seconds, it's so low, will actually then, you know, you can put it up to double the duration of that trait. So that's nice. And think about as well, a Guardian shouts, "Feel my wrath" in PvE. You Sand Squall, suddenly they've gone from giving everyone 5 seconds of quickness to 7 seconds of quickness, and there is play here. Then think again about the other Warhorn skill, the Fire skill, which blasts might and then shares all boons currently on you out to your allies. If you do that and then you Sand Squall, you've just given everyone all of your boons and then extended their durations while you're at it. So there is play, and you can get some nice boon bouncing going around. And that's the most exciting thing to me about the Warhorn. But it's Mesmer again. Surely, like, I would love to have this, exactly this, on a Mesmer spec that's using a lot of Signet of Inspiration stuff, and I'm not saying it would be super viable for many game types at the moment in the game, but these are the kind of synergies I'd look for on that class, not this one. Next up, we've got Dust Storm. It is indeed called Dust Storm, and it is indeed basically, mechanically, a copy of Sandstorm from the Glyph of Storms. That makes me sad. However, effect-wise, it is slightly distinct. Instead of just dropping one storm that spirals, it drops lots of little ones that kind of pulse up in the general area. So there is the potential for someone to stand between multiple hotspots and then get, like, double-blinded. That, like, instead of going blind, 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 it'll go, like, blind, 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 because they're in the middle. So it's slightly different. But again, it's very static, very easily avoided. I'm not that excited about it. Yes, it frees up Glyph of Storms on our bars, sure, our utilities. But is it enough to make me use a Warhorn instead of like a staff? In World vs. World, in PvE? Is it enough to make me use a Warhorn instead of a dagger offhand or a focus offhand in PvP? Or other World vs. World situations? I don't know, guys. I don't. So there you go. That's the Warhorn. Let's move on to the shouts now. Now, shouts are looking very strong. I had a comment on the shouts before this stream came out where someone said, oh god, this is going to feel so cringeworthy because we're kind of Digimon style shouting out the abilities we're about to use. Wouldn't it be a lot cooler? And I totally agree with this. If instead of shouting shock and aftershock, shock and aftershock every time, wouldn't it be cooler if we were like saying some incantation that meant shock and aftershock? That would be so much nicer, please. Now, some of the that specific example I just gave you guys, they say that they're redoing it. It's just going to be called Aftershock instead of Shock and Aftershock, and that explains the kind of the mystery with the Shock skill that I was talking about in a previous video. But let's go through them. The heal first is wash away the pain. And everyone started spamming that like mad in the Twitch chat. They gave us some clarifications on this ability. We heard that it would kind of heal you for a little bit first, and then it would heal everyone around you. And then at the same time, we also heard it heals you for the exact same amount as it heals everyone else, and that was not making any sense. Well, they're basically different iterations of the skill. And the current iteration, and the iteration we are most likely to see, is you do actually heal everyone around you for the same amount as you heal yourself, except it splashes out in these waves, as you can see. So the person to be healed for the exact same amount of you has to be stood right next to you, so they get caught by, like, every proc of the skill as it, like, pulses out. If you're only, like, a certain distance away, you may only get the last little bit and a little portion of the heal. So I do like the way they're doing that, but it seems very, very close range, and I think the risk of bundling together in such a tight AoE is going to get you killed in some game modes, and is what we're doing anyway in other game modes. So how often it's going to actually interact with the game, I don't know. Big thing about heal skills for me is, you remember when they just dropped a bunch of heal skills in before they knew they were doing the elite specialization thing? Many of them didn't see play because they had insanely high cooldowns. Insanely high cooldowns. This one's a 25-second cooldown, which is very comfortable and means it could see some use. I'm still of the mind that all the heal skills in the game have got way too short cooldowns. It really kind of cripples that feeling of heal support in the game. But to actually remain competitive with the other elemental heals and stuff like that, 25 seconds is pretty strong. Alright, moving on, we've got Feel the Burn. Now, each of the 4 shouts that you can slot as utilities is themed after an element and will actually apply the aura of that element with the exception of the air one, which we'll talk about in a second. So this is going to give you a fire aura, has a glorious effect. What it does is it pulses these big waves of fire out. This is interesting because these are shouts, okay? Shouts until now we have seen as kind of just like invisible things that are in the air instantly and then they'll just proc on whoever's affected by it. You know, like if I use On My Mark as a warrior, nothing physically comes out of me and then hits the foe to put vulnerability on them. They just have it instantly. You know, that was like a thing of shouts. Well, the Ellie shouts do actually create physical effects that then must land and, you know, can be dodge rolled and stuff like that. So this one pulses out like these sound wave style fire rings. Each one has a maximum target cap of 5, but as you can see it being used on these golems here, because they're individual waves, in theory you can hit up to 15 different people with it as they move out, and each of those waves has got a separate 5 target cap. So again, this could be really good for World vs. World and when we're fighting against a lot of stuff. Carl said it had a particular synergy because it applies burning as well as damage. Carl said it had particular synergy with the Blinding Ashes trait. Have they changed that to no longer have an internal cooldown? Because if they haven't, then I don't really see it having great synergy at all, because it's more of an AoE proc effect. If I just want to do a bit of damage and burn on someone, I'd be much better off doing it some other way. In the AoE circumstance, it's only going to blind one of the targets it hits, and I don't see it having particular synergy at all. But yeah, so there you go. Feel the Burn. This one is not a fire field. Makes sense, really. Fire fields on the weapons, or the Conjure Flame Axe is the one exception. Makes sense for the Elementalist. Moving on, we've got Shock and Aftershock. This is your Earth one. As I say, it's just being renamed to Aftershock. This is 2 different pulses of damage. First one, in theory, being the shock. The second one being the Aftershock. The first pulse cripples people. The second one immobes. Feels a lot like the Earth Overload. Maybe that's why I'm not too inspired by this. Most exciting thing to me is this gives an Earth aura. So, again, some of this aura application for the Auramancer stuff you're going to start to see. And of all the shouts, I actually think this one has the best, like, accidental synergy in it because of that Earth aura. And, like, it seems like it's really well designed, but I doubt they thought about this. I think it's just a happy coincidence. What's cool about this is you immobilize people with the skill and apply an Earth Aura. Now, the Earth Aura allows you to reflect. So it's got this cool fact about it that you're immobilizing people, so those in melee can't hurt you, and those that are immobilized and then swap to their range set, particularly projectiles, they are also simultaneously being countered because they've been immobile at range. Now they're trying to shoot you, but they're getting reflected for that duration. So it's got that really cool little synergy, that little fact about it that the other shouts are missing. Despite that, the next shout is probably my favourite. This is Eye of the Storm. The effect just as a lightning bolt strikes you and your allies. This feels like what Retreat for the Guardian should have always been. This just gives you super speed and stun breaks, everyone, as we know. And the cool thing is you get the super speed whether it's a stun break or not. Use it to get people away from you. Don't forget the Elementalists also have a bit of super speed on one of their air traits, which has got fairly decent duration now too. So you can chain a fair amount of super speed up and run around. They get a trait that will auto-proc this as well. And I think that's where we'll see most Eye of the Storms coming, rather than people actually picking it as a utility. Because again, if I've got like one slot free and I'm like, I want a stun break, most of the time, guys, I'm going to take something like Lightning Flash, which isn't even a stun break, but it's going to be much better for getting away than just a stun break and a bit of super speed. Traits pending. Alright, lastly, before the Elite, you got Flash Freeze. This was the most boring one to me before. Yeah, it looks pretty. I think it's still the most boring one to me now. It applies Frost Aura. Now, Eye of the Storm doesn't apply Shock Aura. Shock Aura would have been quite cool as well, you know, because you stun people who are trying to harass you while you're running away in super speed. Yeah, that would have made sense, but maybe they just thought that was too strong. Flash Freeze gives you Frost Aura, and it just chills and damages everyone in the area. Not only is this boring, but it feels way too similar to like the way that the Necromancer Elite shout kind of looks, at least. Obviously, it's just like a toned down version of it. It's not unblockable, which I think would have been a really nice opponent here. I honestly think they had some okay ideas for Ellie shouts on the Tempest, and then they got to water and they're like, oh, I don't know what we want to do. We'll just kind of go with this basic thing. That's a shame to me. I really wonder what they were thinking of when it was going to be a sword Elite specialization, and perhaps like these physical utilities or whatever they were going to have then. So yeah, Flash Freeze. Lastly, Rebound. Rebound's a pretty interesting skill. It's got a 60-second cooldown, so this is the first really short cooldown elite skill for the Elementalists. You can look at Glyph of Elementals, but that's not really got a short cooldown because you have to wait for the Elemental to die, and then it will finally go on cooldown. So, 60-second cooldown. And this will reduce the cooldown of the next ability you and your allies use by 25%. Again, I don't think it fits on Ellie as a class. I just don't. But they mentioned some cool ideas, like you can rebound your heal skill. You can, of course, be a Tempest without a Warhorn, run Staff, and rebound your own Meteor Shower. With multiple Ellies, you can kind of rebound each other's rebounds and stuff as well. And it sort of works with 2 Ellies, at least it works. One thing I was interested in, and I asked a friend to do the very vague maths, but the idea would be if you have 5 Ellies, okay, one of those Ellies is a Sylvari with Take Root, which is an invulnerable, and you give him a focus, you give him a Conjure Earth Shield, you give him loads of invulnerabilities, he'll get 4 invulnerability skills, and you have him get rebounded, run in, use his first invuln, then the second Ellie ducks in, rebounds him, he uses his second invuln, and like every single invuln is traded for cooldowns and 25% cooldowns. Can you perma invuln? No, you can't. But you can get sort of close, at least, with Obsidian Flesh. So, I don't know. There's some interesting plays. I think there might be a video in it, actually, just to look through all the skills in the game and say what are the really cool reboundable things. But maybe we'll get to that later. And maybe a better topic, actually, would be what are the best things to continuum split for instant cooldowns on the Chronomancer, like racial stuff, so you can summon 2 power suits or 2 allies for yourself when your racials usually wouldn't allow it. But yeah. Alright, moving on, lastly, we've got the traits. Many of these we'd already heard of, so the minors we already knew, alright? It's Singularity, gain the Overloads, it's gain Swiftness on them for the other minor, and then gain Protection on them for the other minor. The Adepts, you've got Gale Song. This one seems really strong. When you're CC'd, you get Eye of the Storm instantly. And Eye of the Storm, of course, will then stun break you and give you super speed. A lot of classes have traits like this. Ellie has never had a trait like this, so I'm happy to see it. I'm also happy to see that it's not firing a cantrip, which are already in super high use. And obviously cantrips aren't associated with Tempest anyway. But you get the picture, so they went with Gale Song. Or you can take Latent Stamina. This one applies Vigor when you swap to Water Attunement. And whenever you get Vigor, you get like a base amount of Endurance. So this is like your supporty, tanky kind of setup, which seems nice. Don't forget it will then have further synergy with other Vigor applications like Phoenix. A lot of people aren't talking about how Tempest works with Scepter. Everyone's just thinking about how it works with Dagger. I really think, because Scepter is really strong in 2 things, okay? It's incredibly strong in burst, high glassy setups, and it's incredibly strong in really tanky setups. It is not good for the middle ground setups. That's where Dagger is so strong. And because of kind of the role that Tempest is playing, I don't see too much synergy with Scepter, but Phoenix at least grants you Vigor. And don't forget that in Arcane as well, you can get Vigor on crit. So then whenever you get these Vigor applications for yourself, you get like a chunk of Endurance back too. And don't forget too that Vigor was nerfed recently, so this maybe brings it back up to what it once was. Or lastly, you can take Unstable Conduits, and this is Overloading will grant you an aura. So even though I just said Latent Stamina is kind of your supporty option, it's not really, because I think if you really want to support as a Tempest, you want to go Auramancer. And for that, you're going to take Unstable Conduits, so you get lots of auras. And just for what it's worth, it's when the Overload finishes. So if you Earth Overload, or let's say you do an Air Overload, okay? Easily interruptible, easily to get cleaved down while you're in the middle of it or whatever. You're not going to get that shocking aura through the duration of the Overload. You're only going to get it at the end. So if you get interrupted, you miss that proc. Alright, so that's Adept. Onto Master, you've got Tempestuous Area. Now, this is where I think most Tempest usage will be seen. I think we might see Staff Tempest in World versus World running this trait. Allies get Might when you shout, and obviously these have got big ranges, so that's great. And enemies get Weakness on shouts. And again, remember though that these shouts aren't the same as other ones that just like invisibly proc on stuff. Think again about like Feel the Burn. This could mean that if you're an ally and you see a Tempest use Feel the Burn, you can walk into the first wave of fire and get Might from it, and then the second wave of fire and get Might from it, and then the third and get Might from it. And these big sweeping kind of AoEs, again, think about the target cap again. This could be giving Might to your World versus World Zerg more than just 5 Might, because different people are going to be in different sections of different waves. That could be fun. And then Weakness on the enemies too. So it's kind of one of these, let's turn the tides. We get Might, you get Weakness. And Weakness is obviously very, very strong. I will say, as boring as I think the Water Shout is, giving the Weakness on that seems easier to proc than the other ones, because that is much harder like to dodge. It's got much less of a tell. Another thing, this will then have synergy with Gale Song. So Gale Song, when you're CC'd, you cast Eye of the Storm, which will give you super speed and stun break you. That also happens to be a shout. So then not only do you stun break and get super speed, but you get Might and the enemies around you get Weakness. So there's some serious synergy on that one. Next Master is Earthen Proxy. This is protection is 20% stronger, going from 33% to 40%. So really it's 7%. It's kind of a weird wording there to make it sound really, really good. But yeah, so protection will now reduce 40% of all incoming damage. Consider that you've got a lot of aura application between the shouts and the overloads, and consider that if you specialize Earth also, you can get protection on aura, and consider that your Earth overload is already giving you protection. That's a lot of protection. In fact, if you then took air as well, so you were Tempest, Earth, Air, and you took fresh air, you could keep bouncing into air and keep overloading in theory and get like a ton of protection, which is kind of an interesting idea. Then lastly, you've got Harmonious Conduits. Recharge from overloading an achievement is now just 15 seconds. What I found most interesting about this, we already knew about this trait, there's not too much to say, but what I did find interesting that the stream revealed was if you take Arcane, Arcane also reduces overload cooldown. So Arcane Tempests will be able to double dip, and they'll be able to get really low overloads, but they weren't clear on whether that functionality is going to remain until the actual Elite spec comes out. Whew! Lastly, Grandmasters. I think the Grandmasters are just a little boring. I don't know. Let's see. We got Imbued Melodies. The Warhorn skills. Now, the tooltip here says that they break stun from allies in front of you. They said that they don't want that. It's just going to be Warhorn abilities, break stun for allies. Now, that sounds crazy strong, because you get 8 Warhorn abilities. Whoa, 8 stun breaks, AoE? No. They're on a 10. The trait itself is on a 10-second cooldown, which has to be there. Otherwise, it's completely overpowered. But here's one thing I think that cripples this Grandmaster. That 10-second internal cooldown and that stun break, that is going to proc whether people are actually around you stunned or not. It's the same, and it's a big problem in Guild Wars 2. It's the same with stuff like Sigil of Nullification, which strips a boon on crit. It will strip a boon even if they don't have a boon on them. So then it's on cooldown when they do put a boon on them, and it's kind of a terrible sigil. There's the same problem here. So you're going to be fighting. You have to use your Warhorn skills. You're not going to just never use your Warhorn skills until you see someone is stunned, right? And then, when someone is finally stunned around you, stuns don't last that long. These are clutch twitch moments. And you're going to think, all right, I'll stun break him, I'll quickly use it. You'll use it, and I think most of the time, unless the implementation is different for this than everything else in the game, it's pot luck whether your cooldown is actually up on the Warhorn. And most of the time, I think it's not going to be up, and that stun break isn't going to go through. And that seems really unfun to me. Hopefully that it isn't the way it will ultimately be implemented, but for now, I'm very, very lukewarm about that trait. You got Lucid Singularity. This is the one that makes you immune to crowd control while you're overloading, so you can do this badass break bar, earth attunement, protection, god guy roaming around above Zergs for a little while. And also what's important too is it cleanses those CCs initially. It doesn't just make you immune to future ones, or 100% reduction in their duration, but it cleanses you too. And then finally, the last Grandmaster, Elemental Bastion. This one excites me greatly, but I don't think it belongs here on Tempest. Alright, so here, look. Auras you apply, heal allies. This is amazing. This sounds really cool. This is an awesome supporty thing. It's access to healing other people outside of your heal and stuff, even when you are not in water attunement. So every time you give people an aura, you get some kind of a flat heal goes out onto those guys too. They compare it to altruistic healing on Guardians, and that's a favorite trait of many Guardians, even though it has very little use in a lot of places. It's still like it's a cool trait. But here's the thing, and the other effect of Elemental Bastion, I should say as well, is when you get low on health, you give yourself a Frost Aura, and everyone around you. Great. But, come on, let's be honest. This is a water attunement trait. This should just be tacked onto the water trait that makes you share auras to nearby allies. It's just a fact it should. And the extra thing of get a Frost Aura when you get low on health is incredibly similar to an already existing water trait, which is gain a Frost Aura on yourself when you are crit. And I like the idea that you can double up on them, and you can, again, double dip. That's fun. But just in terms of how distinct this trait is, it's nothing particularly new for what we've seen with Ellie, and I think it is in the wrong line. So, yeah, Tempest. It's okay. I think it's pretty good. I think a lot of stuff I was happy to see. Like, for example, Elementalists, we already know they're great at damage. I wasn't even expecting damage here. You'll notice that out of all these traits, there are no, like, flat modifiers that give them a bunch of percent-based damage. That's because they've got tons of them in their other lines, and they're already all the way up there. I'm not sad about that whatsoever. It's just some of the stuff here seems a little short-sighted to me. I love the look of the effects. I definitely see some builds. Auramancing, I will be playing as a Tempest. That seems really cool to me. The only downside is, again, it's like another line we have to go for to be an effective Auramancer. And we're already split through too many lines. Fire is good because it gives you the fire auras. Air is good because it gives you the swiftness and the fury. Earth is good because it gives you the protection. Water is almost necessary because it gives you aura sharing. And now it's got Tempest as well. And on one hand, I like that like you're so split for decisions. But because everything is so spread out, we're kind of in a bad position now where it's like, oh, we can only take 3 specializations, and maybe it only works if we get the majority of these. I'll have to hear what you guys have to say. Don't get me wrong, I'm not being a total Debbie Downer. I like it. I'm going to be playing an awful lot of it. I just guess I hope for some fair iteration, and that the tuning of these really beautiful looking effects are altered as time goes forward. Very curious to see what next week's Elite Specialization will be, if they do one. And I guess I'll see you guys at that point. Have a great evening, guys. Catch you next time.